Hello, I'd like to welcome you to the office of the Patriot. My name is Myron Ybarra and I'm your host. In this office, we will be discussing political and social hot topics, as well as mining into and dissecting the meanings and causes of these hot topics. Today, we are going to be discussing freedom, the backbone of American society. You've heard the term freedom numerous times and quite a bit lately with politicians and the media throwing it around, using it as the stepping stone to a sounding board to tell you that it's going to be lost or you're not going to have it, or it's going to be amended or taken away or given to you in one way, shape, or form. So we're going to look into what freedom actually is. Is it something that is innate, like some people claim, or is it something that is given? We're also going to look into components of freedom and how they affect us. So according to Merriam-Webster, freedom is the absence of necessity, coercion, or constraint in choice or action. In simple terms, freedom is personal autonomy. It's the autonomy to make your own decisions that affect your environment or your life. To decide to go left or go right, to have a firearm, not have a firearm, that's freedom. Sounds like a good thing, but too much of a good thing in reality is not a good thing. Without having some kind of social control, freedom run amok, total freedom, would likely result in complete anarchy. And that's something that a cooperative society cannot sustain on. We would just collapse. And that's the reason why we have a democratic republic. So are we free? Well, that's a bit more difficult to quantify. In limited scope, yes, we are. Freer than most other people in other countries. But I fear that freedom is getting leached away by the same people who claim they want to help you keep it. So, if freedom can be taken away by that same standard, freedom can't be inherent. And this is despite what the history books or Schoolhouse Rock may have told you. If freedom was inherent, then it would be like other innate possessions that we have, such as our soul, our thoughts, or our learned experiences. However, I've learned that freedom can only be acquired by two things. One, it has to be given, or two, it has to be taken. There is no other way for freedom to actually exist. So who gives you freedom and has the ability to take it? Well, there's a lot of people, really. Your bosses, your family, obviously your government, parents, and for kids, the school, your school teachers and administrators, all have the ability to remove a component of your freedom. What makes the United States such a precious place, and actually a one-of-a-kind place in the entire world, is the fact that our founding fathers took their freedom from the British and gave it to the people. They took it in 1774 when the First Continental Congress was convened, and in 1776 when the Declaration of Independence was signed. And then, in an unprecedented act, our founding fathers gave the freedom that they took from the British to the people by virtue of the United States Constitution, and more specifically, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, known as the Bill of Rights, in 1787. What's really troubling today, however, is many Americans don't know or don't understand how special that makes this country. So let's move this idea of freedom from the macro to the micro, because it'll be a little bit easier to digest. When my wife and I were new parents with our first son, we maintained essentially absolute control over every aspect of his life, even though, he is a United States citizen and thus was born free. We told him when he could eat, or basically fed him, because when he was a toddler, he didn't really have the means to prepare his own food. We provided protection, we provided the shelter. We told him when he basically went to sleep, when he got up. Every aspect of his life was controlled. This is pretty much the norm with virtually all families, right? You control all aspects of your child's living when they're inside the house. However, when they get older, we relinquished, at least we did, we relinquished some of the control based off of observable behaviors that we saw in our son. So, as an example, when my son was 2 years old and my wife was making dinner at, say, 4 o'clock to serve right around 5:30, my son didn't have the freedom to go to the cupboard, the pantry, to pull out his favorite cookies or open the refrigerator and grab a handful of grapes. He just didn't have that freedom. Why? Well, my wife and I knew that he just didn't have the wisdom at that point to be able to make sound decisions with regard to what he was going to eat. He would have ate too much. He would have ate the wrong things. We would have had to deal with the repercussions of that, cleaning dirty diapers. And so we controlled it. However, let's move forward 10 years, right? So now my son is playing baseball, and he gets out of school. He goes to baseball practice. After practice, he comes home. He's hot. He's tired. And he's hungry and thirsty. So at that point, we granted him more freedom around the house to make decisions because we knew, based off of observable behaviors, that he understood that now is not the time to make my own meal and get myself full because my mom is making dinner. So I'm going to get maybe a string cheese and a handful of crackers and a glass of water or a glass of milk or a glass of juice to tide me over for that hour and a half, 2 hours until dinner is served. We give our children, we give them more freedom as they demonstrate that they understand the rules of the house. And that's pretty much how it goes with society. Ultimately, when my children got to early adulthood, they no longer wanted to live under the freedoms that we gave them. We still had constraints, obviously, but they had quite a bit more freedom. And they took the freedom that they wanted by virtue of moving out of the house. As I said before, freedom can only be acquired two ways, and that's to be given or taken. We gave them freedom as they demonstrated they understood the boundaries, and then ultimately they took their freedom willingly. I didn't want to say I relinquished it because they left. That's not that I could have kept them there, but they took it by virtue of leaving, and they took it with my blessing. So now they're free, just like we are, to make their own choices in life, and like every other parent, we pray that the choices are good and wholesome, and that they do the right thing. Now, you may have heard or may have understood that I carefully selected the word pray. And the reason why I selected the word pray was because, and this may ruffle some feathers for some people, freedom is also based off another concept and cannot survive without it. And that concept is based on religious dogma. So you're probably going, well, how can freedom be based off a religious dogma? Well, it is. And that dogma is faith. So what is faith? Well, faith essentially is the belief in something with only correlating evidence to support it, right? I'll give you an example. I believe the words of the Bible are words of God that have been transcribed by the men who God gave those words to. So I believe that. Why? Because of the correlating evidence that there is a higher power. Do I absolutely know that there's a higher power? No, I don't. And that's what makes faith such a special thing, much like freedom. We don't know. We can only look at observable facts to make a determination, much like when I gave freedom to my children, and like our government maintains our freedom for us. And that's what they're supposed to do. And that's not what we're seeing today. We're seeing a government who has fear and distrust of their community, and as a result is removing those freedoms because they don't believe that you have the wherewithal to make good, sound decisions. Unfortunately, that is one of the major reasons why we're seeing a lot of freedoms being removed today. Let me give you another example. Like I said, it's easier to work from the macro to the micro. So I gave my middle daughter the freedom to acquire a car once she got her learner's permit and was working towards her driver's license. Part of the conditions I imposed upon her was that she had to have at least a 3.0 GPA cumulative through her high school year up until the the date that we allowed her to get the car. She had to pay for a portion of the car, so I told my kids that I would pay for half of the car up to, I want to say it was $3,000. So she basically had to have skin in the game. I also said that they couldn't have any Fs, and they had to have some kind of part-time employment. And my daughter was working as a gymnastic instructor at a local gymnasium. And so, with my blessing, she got the car. Now, I didn't know that she wasn't going to, or was going to abide by all the conditions that I imposed upon her, and I didn't know if she was going to be a good driver and a safe driver and considerate of others. I just believed it because I had faith, and that faith was based on observable behaviors that she exhibited while living in the house. She was a good student, was never a problem, never in trouble at school. People loved her. Obviously, we did. But she was a good person. And that was the reason why we allowed that freedom. Had we not seen those things, then in all likelihood we probably wouldn't have allowed it. So that's why faith is a major component, because freedom cannot survive without it. We have to have an idea that the people are going to do the right thing by giving them this freedom. That's what makes it such a difficult concept or difficult thing to give, rather. It's really hard for people to relinquish freedom. I mean, it was hard for me, and I knew my daughter, and we have a biological connection. So imagine granting the freedom to people who you don't know, hoping that they are going to behave in the best way, and work towards a wholesome community and make again good choices. Now, the checks and balances that we have for that, and I spoke to it a little bit earlier, but basically just touched on that, was the idea of a democratic republic. And having that democratic republic allows us to have a sense of relief in a way, to grant freedoms to people because they understand the repercussions of not following a set of rules, right? So when that part of the component, that part of the checks and balances is lost, then the idea of granting freedom becomes harder to do. So if there is no enforcement of the laws, if there is no accountability for misbehavior, then freedom is a lot harder to give. People start getting afraid because there is no repercussions for misbehavior. The idea of you acting as a morally centered, thinking that everybody else is going to do it, and then they don't, and you're expecting as a good citizen to have people accountable, and then all of a sudden saying that they're not accountable, gives you cause. You're like, okay, well, if people aren't accountable, then we need to take away these freedoms because of the idea of safety. And I understand those feelings. However, they really are counter to the principles that the United States was founded on. Faith is the component that makes freedom special. It's the bedrock of freedom, and it allows freedom to prosper in a country where there is very, very little commonality with regard to culture, ethnicity, language, for that matter. So all of these things are completely different, but everyone that is here gravitated here as a result of freedom. The idea that the individual matters as much, if not more, than the collective. And by virtue of ensuring that the rights and the freedoms of the individual are preserved, by that same standard, the rights and protections and freedoms of the collective are also preserved. And that's done through law, through the democratic republic process. And at the same time, freedom is a fragile construct that will crumble unless it's preserved, used, and ultimately defended. Freedom is ours to lose by relinquishing it freely or by having it removed by the government who's been entrusted to preserve it. When government doesn't have faith in the people that it governs, that's when freedom is lost. Well, that concludes my talk today about freedom. It is my hope that you gain some insight into how precious a idea and a concept freedom is, and how critical it is for us to maintain and preserve it in order to maintain the American way of life. It is my plan to post a video at least once a week in hopes of spurring debate and discussion about, again, new events or political ideologies. I encourage you to post your comments. I really want to read them. I also want to thank you for tuning in to today's video. If you like what was presented today, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for the next video release. Thank you for tuning in to the Office of the Patriot. Have a great day.